Hello and welcome back to the Ninox Learning Channel. My name is Andy. I'm a Ninox programmer and trainer, and in this class we're going to pick up where we left off in the previous session, working with the select statement. However, this time we're going to apply the select statement in a very specific way using a new screen element called views. We're going to look at views that show us content textually and numerically, as well as graphically. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, for this session, we've created a new database. Like the previous session, this database has only one table in it. As you can see, it's simply an invoices table. There are no links, there are no children tables, nothing complex in this data model. This particular table of invoices contains about 400 records, each record representing a single invoice from a company to a customer, where an invoice was cut on a specific date for a specific amount. This particular company sells three things: services, products, and warranties. And then each invoice is totaled up for a total amount due. We track the customer type, and we track the name of the salesperson who negotiated the deal that resulted in the sale. What we're going to be talking about in this session is a continuation of our development of dashboards and control panels. But we're going to add a twist. We're going to add a new element to our dashboard, and that element is called a view. Let's begin. As we did the last time, I want to step outside of the table that contains the content that we want to analyze and transform into information and business intelligence. So to do that, we need a second table, a second location that we can effectively park in, so we then can look at the entirety of the invoices table. I'd like to point out that this database, working with views, is available in the Nioxus portal. You can go there at www.nioxus.com, download the template Working with Views, and please follow along as we build out these dashboards and as we explore an entirely new and powerful way to apply the select statement in the construction, design, and development of our Ninox applications. Back to our training. We're going to create a new table, and as we did in the previous class, we're going to call this dashboards. We'll start with a single text field. It does not need to be named, just call it text, and go ahead and save your changes. Now, let's go ahead and go into the dashboards table, create that first record, and again, let's use the entire form, the entire screen that's available to us by creating a second view called Form, and again, we will call that Form View Dashboard. And there we go. Here's the single text field we created. We are going to use that one later, but for right now we don't need it. So let's just minimize its size and park it up in the top left-hand corner. As I said, we're going to begin working in this class with a new type of screen element, and the element is the view. While in administrative mode, with our wrench glowing red in the top right-hand corner and our tool palette appearing off to the left, click on Layout Elements to bring up the list of the 8 different elements that we can embed or add to an on-screen form. And at the bottom, we see the 2 elements we're going to be working with in this class: the view, or the table listing of numeric and alphanumeric content, and the chart. They are both the same thing. They're a mechanism or a tool that we can use when we're sitting in one table to see what's happening in one or many other tables. The only difference is the view element demonstrates the content of the table we're looking at, or the table we've selected, in numbers and letters, alphanumeric, showing each of the pieces of content field by field. Conversely, the chart view allows us to look at all of the content in the table that we've selected, but we can see it graphically in the form of line charts and bar charts, histograms, pie charts, and a variety of different graphic interpretations that are built into the Ninox data presentation engine. Let's start with a simple data view. Click on View, and it will add this single line element to our screen form. Let's go ahead right now and save that change and click on the wrench to open up the parameter screen for this newly created view. Now, here's where we continue our discussion of the select statement. Think of a view as a window. It is something that we can use to see outside of our current location into another space. In this particular instance, our current location is the dashboards table. This view element is a window that we can use to look out of the dashboards table and into the invoices table. Now, before we do anything else, I want to remind you, there are no links between these two tables. There is no outer join, there's no parent-child relationship or inner join. These are two completely different elements, only having the database they're in common. They're both in this database called Working with Views. Other than that, they have no relationship to or with each other. And that's one of the wonderful things about a view. It does not require there to be any link of any kind from the table in which you're currently parked, what we would call the current table, and the table that contains the content that you want to look at or select in view. So back to our dashboard. We're going to select the view element while in administrative mode, click on the wrench to bring up the parameters, and go into the formula statement. And we're going to create a very simple formula that, now that you've been through the previous class, is going to be very easy for us to write. Select, and we know that the select statement is always followed by the name of the table we're selecting, and in this case, that table is the invoices table. That's all there is to it. One command, one parameter, one click, 2 clicks, and here is all of the data in our invoices table. Now, at this point, this window has no controls, no parameters around it. We have essentially said, show us everything in this target or selected table. We can name this view, and we'll name it our invoices view. Of course, you can name it anything you like. Save our changes, as we should be doing all the time. And as is the case with Ninox, it selects the first 6 fields, no matter what they are, including the ID field, and places them in the view. By default, Ninox will select the ID field, which is the field it creates to uniquely identify each record in the table, and then 5 more fields, if there are that many. And again, by default, Ninox will place a count at the bottom of that first column, the ID column, telling us how many records are being displayed or presented in the view. As I said, there are about 400, exactly 390 invoices in the invoices table, and since there are no parameters, no conditions, no qualifications or limits, all 390 of those records are visible through this window, through this view element. Now, as we know, when we build dashboards, we want to be able to manipulate what we see. We want to add controls, which are a control panel element, to our dashboard. And when we take controls and put them together with a dashboard, we get what's called a cockpit. The cockpit is the one place where we can sit and see a dashboard that shows us everything that's happening and gives us the controls we need to affect what we see in that dashboard and how we see it. But the most important thing to remember is, that every view begins by identifying what table we want to see in that view. What content should appear in that window? And yes, you can only view one table at a time. I do want to mention, however, you can have multiple views on the same form. And we're going to see a little bit later in this class why that's such an important and versatile component or application of the view element. But to get started, let's look at another function. Remember, we talked about those enhancers or those qualifiers. We talked about the different control functions or keywords that we could add to the select statement that would enable us to create information out of data and to eventually create business intelligence out of information. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's first fine-tune what we see in the view. And to do that, let's select the view, if it's not already selected on your screen, and click on the wrench in the middle to present the parameters window or the parameters form for this view. It should say view right at the very top, whatever name you've assigned. And in this case, we've assigned the name Invoices View. The formula should reflect the fact that we are selecting the invoices table. That is what we want to see. And now let's open up more options. And let's go to Edit Columns. Click on the Edit Columns button at the bottom of the View Parameters window. This will bring up a screen that by now we should be very familiar with. On the right, we see all of the fields, all of the columns or the available fields in the target or selected table, in this case, the invoices table. On the left are the columns we have selected to appear through our window in this view. And the columns or fields that we want to see are invoice number, invoice date, and customer name, the name of the salesperson, and the amount of product sales, service fees, warranty and miscellaneous, and finally, the invoice total. Let's also go ahead and select invoice number from the left-hand column and make sure that that shows or is sorted in ascending order from the lowest invoice at the top to the highest invoice at the bottom of the view. We'll click OK once, twice, and 3 times, and now we see that our view has changed just a little bit. The ID field, which was previously column 1, is gone. It's been replaced by the information we have specifically selected, or the columns or fields that we selected when we edited the columns of our view. Again, if you haven't already done it, click Save, and get in the habit of saving all the time. Whenever the opportunity presents itself to save the changes you've made, take advantage of that opportunity. The one time you don't save is the one time you're going to wish you did. Let's continue. Before we go any further, let's clean this view up a little bit. The invoice number column can be skinnied up just a bit, as well as the invoice date, customer name, and salesperson. I want my product sales, service fees, and warranty and miscellaneous columns, as well as the invoice total column, to be nice and wide and approximately the same width across those 4 on the right-hand side. Now, let us begin to add what we call parameters, or the parameterization of this view. Right now, this is a dashboard. We can look at it, and it presents us raw data. There's no compiled information, certainly no business or actionable intelligence to be gained by this current presentation on our screen, but that's about to change. And we are going to change that by adding control panel elements, or controls, that allow us to fine-tune this view in many different ways. But everything we do is ultimately going to be controlled through the select statement. This is simply another way to apply the select statement to the construction and design and development of our bespoke Ninox applications. The first thing we're going to need is 2 date fields. Let's return to administrative mode, click on plus field or add field in our toolbox, and add 1 and then again 2 or a second date field, and move them both up to the top so they appear just to the right of that text field, and go ahead and skinny them down so they are as narrow from left to right as possible. Let's name the first date field begin date, or abbreviate BEG, and the second one end date, and click Save. These 2 fields are going to give the end user the opportunity at runtime to put in parameters that will control what we see through our window. Remember, right now we see 390 records, starting with the first one that was cut and all the way at the bottom, the last one, or at least the one with the highest invoice number. I would like to have a little more control over what I see. And the first control I want to have is to narrow down the date range. I want to be able to look at everything from an entire year, or narrow it down to only those invoices for one particular day. To do this, we need parameters. We need to parameterize the view or the selection of what we see. We have our begin date and our end date fields. Let's add in the dates starting on November 1st of 2018 and ending on November 30th. And I'm just going to go ahead and type that in, November 30th, also 2018. This represents the date range, the beginning and ending dates of the range of the invoices I want to see. I don't want anything in my view that happened before November 1st or after November 30th. Let's select our view, open up the parameters window, and go into the formula where we're going to make some changes and enhancements to this now very basic select statement. The first thing I want to do is collect the 2 parameters into 2 different variables. This is a programming best practice because it enables you to keep better track of how your code is written. It's also particularly good for people or users who are new either to Ninox coding or coding in general. Get in the habit of using variables to store the content that you're using within the scope and the runtime of your formulas or your code blocks. I will create 2 variables. The first one called xBEG or x beginning, and that will contain the content of the beginning date field. And the second variable called xEnd will contain the end date or the content of the end date field. Notice that these 2 fields were labeled with all caps on the screen. It does not matter if you duplicate that all cap formatting inside the code. End date presented this way with only a capital E and only a capital D is still referring to this field right here, this field at the bottom, the end date field. So this is one of those rare instances in Ninox where upper lowercase, all uppercase, standard case really isn't going to matter that much. Now what we want to do is we want to use these parameters, these 2 variables defined in lines 1 and 2, to control what we see. We remember how to do that because we learned it in our previous training class. Remember the key word where. Where is how we define the criteria, the minimum requirements necessary to be included in the array of records selected through the select statement. So let's use our keyword where, and we want to define the field where the criteria is going to be applied. And that field is the invoice date field. And don't forget what I said in the previous class about how important it is to make sure you've spelled your field and table names correctly. Being off by one letter will create the error of field or table not found. And also remember, when any reference to a table or a field includes more than one word or spaces, you must include that reference you must enclose that reference in single quotation marks. Here we are seeing a reference to a table, no single quotes because there's no space in the name. Here we see a reference to a field. We need those quotes because the name of the field contains two words with a space in the middle. Now, we are going to use one field for both parameters. We are going to select all records in this table, in the invoice table, where the invoice date is greater than or equal to the beginning date, and that same field, invoice date, is also less than or equal to the ending value. And we'll just put a space in there to make it a little bit easier to read. Two parameters, a beginning date and an ending date. One table selected. One field in that table being used twice, once for each parameter. And the AND conjunction says that any record that is included in this view, in this selected array, must meet both criteria. This conjunction AND, or its opposite cousin OR, specifies how multiple criteria are applied when they are included in the where statement. In this case, AND says that this single field, the contents of this field, must at the same time be at or after the beginning date and at or before the end date. We click OK, and there we see it. I'll exit administrative mode. And what was previously a listing of 390 records spanning the entire business year of 2018 is now limited to only records, only invoices cut in November. If I want to see invoices in the first 5 days of November, that's easy. All I have to do is change the ending date from November 30th back to November 5th, and there we go. We see only those invoices, and in this case there are 5, that were cut on or after November 1st and on or before November 5th. And to make this a little bit easier, let's change the order in which the invoices are appearing. Let's put it in ascending order by invoice date. There we go. 3 invoices cut on November 3rd, 2 more on the 5th. What happened on the 6th? If we advance this one day, we see a few more invoices added in. So now we have this control, this date control, or these 2 parameters that allow us to kind of fine-tune what we see through our viewing window. I'm going to go ahead and set that back to the 30th so I can see all of November. Now, there are a couple statistics that I would like to be able to see, and I don't just want to put them at the bottom of each column. I want them to be a little more obvious to me. And the first statistic is, I want to know the total sales for the period reflected by this beginning and ending date. Or more specifically, I want the grand total of all of the numbers that appear in this total invoice column on the far right. Time for a new keyword. Time for one more mathematic operation that we can apply to our select statement. Let's begin with a new formula. And again, we always code from the inside out. We are first going to, well, you know what? Let me give you a hint. Never type code that you can copy from someplace else. Let's go ahead, go into the invoices view, select all 3 lines of that code. Click OK. And now that you've copied that, now create a new formula and paste what you just copied. This time, however, this code is not in a view element, it's in a formula element. So we want it to return something. We want it to return a value to be displayed in that formula element. And what we want it to return is the values in the total invoice field. And what do we want to do with those values? We want to sum them up. We want to apply the mathematic process of summing or adding numbers together. Which numbers? Specifically, the numbers in the records of the selected table, the invoices table, but only those records where the invoice date is both and at the same time at or after a beginning date and before or at an ending date. We use our period to specify the next step in our path. Our first step was to define the table we wanted, and that was the invoices table. The second step is the field that we want. And then finally, applying this modifier, the sum keyword, SUM, to tell Ninox to add up everything it finds at the end of this path, this field, in this table. Let's click OK. Let's, before we do anything else, also indicate we want this to appear in US dollar format, and we can even add in the thousands separator if we like. Now click OK and save changes. And we see nothing. No total, no content at all. Let's go back and see what we did wrong. While in administrative mode, select this formula field, go into the parameters, and go into the code. There's no error message, so all of our syntax and spelling is correct. This code worked perfectly well. We just copied it over from the view. Let me tell you what's wrong. There are 2 formats that we use when using the select statement with qualifiers or criteria or qualification. This format that utilizes the where statement keyword or the where clause is correct and appropriate when we are selecting records into an array to be presented or displayed in a view. This syntax, this format of the select statement will not work when we are selecting an array of records to be transformed, either mathematically or statistically, to be transformed into some other kind of information. There's a different format that we need to use. Now, I am going to put that format right underneath these first 3 lines of code so that I can effectively point out the difference. We then will set up the format correctly so we can get the additive total. And the format looks like this. Again, we're still using the same 2 lines to collect the values for the beginning and the ending date. No problem there. Here is the difference. Instead of using the where clause, we embed the criteria for inclusion in the selected array inside of square brackets. Again, we select the table that contains the values we want, or the records that we want. We then establish or define the criteria for records to be included in the selected array, not following a where statement. That only works when we're selecting this array for display or presentation. This time, the criteria are enclosed inside of a left and a right square bracket. This is the keys immediately to the right of the letter P on your keyboard. Once we have selected the table, and that selection is going to have to be inside of parentheses, and we have defined the criteria for inclusion in the array, and that criteria must be enclosed in square brackets, and we've included the period. We need that period to define the end of the first step. The first step was selecting the table. Period means now the beginning of the second step in our path, selecting the specific field within that table. All of this is enclosed in a set of parentheses. And then the keyword sum, the mathematic process of adding numbers together, is applied. Let us delete this format that included the where statement and replace it with this new format that is specifically designed and is to be used at all times when the resultant array, when the records selected by virtue of the select statement are to be used as operands or components in a mathematic or statistical manipulation. We click OK, save it, and now we get our total. And let's call this total sales and move it right up top. Now, this is a dynamic field. It is calculating automatically. Right now, we are looking at all invoices beginning on or after November 1 and concluding on or before November 30th. During that period of time, during that range, we had almost $72,300 worth of sales. If we further limit our range, if we're only looking at the first week, November 1st through the 8th, we see fewer invoices, and we automatically see our total change to reflect the grand total or the sum of just the invoices that appear in the view. It would also be nice to know how many invoices we're actually looking at. Now, of course, I could select any field in the view and count the number of records in that field, but this is buried down at the bottom of the column, and I don't want that, especially if my particular view is spreading all the way down to the bottom of the screen. That's not where I want key performance indicators or statistics to appear. I want them right up top. So I'm going to need another formula. But remember what I said a moment ago. Don't ever write code that you can copy from someplace else. And we're going to use the exact same code yet again. Select the code from the formula that we used to get the sum or the additive total of the invoices in our view. Copy it. Select a new formula and paste it. Only one thing needs to be changed. We don't want the sum of these records. We want the count of these records. And since this is a statistical manipulation, we are merely counting the number of elements in an array. We don't even need to specify a field. All we need to specify is the source of the records being counted, and that is the invoices table. That's the table we selected. And the criteria for records to be included in this selection or in this array. Once we have defined where the records are coming from and which records are qualified to be included in the set or the subset or selection, we then apply this keyword, count, to tell us how many records are in the selection. And we see immediately there are 10. Let's shrink that field down so it's as narrow as we can get it. And let's retitle it Number Records in Selection. Let's apply one more formula. And that is simply the total sales formula divided by the number of records in selection. That will automatically be formatted as US dollars with the dollar symbol. Why? Because remember, the first operand, the first field in a calculation defines the format or the type of information that will result from the formula. In this case, the first field is total sales. Total sales has already been defined not only as a numeric field, but as a numeric currency field. It's the first field in the formula. Therefore, the result of this formula will also be displayed in numbers and as currency. And what this is now telling us is the average sale within the period defined by the parameters of beginning date and ending date. This is great. If I want to look at the entire year of 2018, I can go January 1 through December 31, and I can see that I cut 389 invoices for a total of $757,672, and then my average sale, and we'll just relabel this field, average invoice in period. The average invoice for this period was just a few ticks below 2,000 US dollars. Now we've got some controls, we've got some statistics, we have a nice looking dashboard. Let's make it even fancier. Let's add another field that is a yes/no field. Let's grab this field, put it right up at the top, skinny it up, and relabel it Display Detail. Click on the wrench to open the parameters and change it to a slider. Save that change. Now select the view, that detailed presentation of all of the records that qualified to be in the selection, in the array of records selected in the formula that is on the back end of this view. And specify in the display field only if when display detail is yes or true. All we have to do is put the name of this binomial field, this yes/no switch. Now what we have is a dashboard that allows us to see all of our information in summary, or when we flip the switch, summary and detail. So we can see as much or as little as we want to see. Again, these controls, like parameters and switches, allow us to control, in this case control is both a noun and a verb, these controls allow us to control the view that is appearing on our dashboard. And this view is in real time. Change the date parameters. I only want to see not an entire year, but only the month of January. 389 invoices become 28, and we see that our total sales for that 1 month, $60,529 US dollars, or an average of just over $2,100 per sale. Don't need the detail? Fine, turn it off and it disappears. Here is our customer sales cockpit. We have a dashboard that shows us only what we want to see, and we have the controls at our disposal that allow us to affect what appears on the dashboard. Now, the next thing I would like to do is see this same data, but I want to see it graphically. Here we are seeing it textually in alphanumeric characters. I want to see this exact same data, but I want to see it in a different view. Here we're seeing all of the invoices one by one. And that's great. But I also, at the same time, want to see this same information subtotaled by customer name. Since this is the exact same view with merely different fields being selected, I'm going to copy this block of code, this select statement, and all of its parameters. I'm going to copy it, go back to my toolbox, add a second view, go into formula, and paste what I copied. And here we start all over again with the ID field and the next 5 fields in the table. Select this second view that you created, go into Edit Columns, and specify that you want the customer name, invoice date, invoice number, name of salesperson, and just the invoice total. And you want that grouped by customer name. Select the customer name in the visible fields on the left and use that as the grouping field. And there we go. But we want our subtotals. We did effectively group all of our invoices alphabetically by customer name, but we're not getting the total. Let's just do one more thing. Go back to Edit Columns, select Invoice Total, and click Sum. OK once, OK twice, OK 3 times, and as long as we're at it, grab the total invoice column on the far right and move it all the way over so it is immediately to the left, immediately to the right of this grouping or customer name column. And finally, rename this view Sales per Period by Customer. And of course, save your work. There we go. One table, 2 views, the exact same selection, but 2 different windows, giving us 2 different ways to see the information that the controls say we want to see. If I want to see all of my sales in February, I only need select February 1 as the beginning date and February 28th is the ending date. There's all of my sales, one invoice at a time. There's my detail. February sales were $60,701. 28 invoices were cut at an average sale of $2,167, almost $2,168 per invoice. If I don't want the detail, I turn the detail off, and here's my summary by customer. Here's my $60,701 right here. So we've confirmed that the total is correct, but this total is broken down or subtotaled by customer. We can have that with or without the detail, or you can have just the detail you want to see. Want to see only those invoices for the biggest customer? Back into administrative mode, select the total invoice column, and put it in descending order. Now, we see that our biggest customer was Cavern Foods. If I click on Cavern Foods, who represented $11,000 of the $60,000 for that month of February, click on the name, and it was one invoice on February 24th for $11,175. I would have liked to have known how many invoices were actually included in that subtotal. How do I do that? Back to administrative mode, select any other column. I'll select invoice date and give me a count. Now, here, in addition to my total sales by customer, and we've verified that 60,701 is the total, we also see the 28 invoices broken down by customer. 28 invoices in the month of February, 4 of them from Diamond Microsystems. So our biggest sales customer was Cavern Foods at $11,000. But our most active customer was Diamond Microsystems with 4 invoices in that month. And there we go. So this dashboard allows us to have all of the detail and all of the summary, or just the detail we want to see for any particular customer. And this ability to have multiple views in the same form allows us to create very, very powerful dashboards. And I'd like to add one more piece of power to the dashboard presentation. I'm going to grab in administrative mode the sizing handle on the right of the invoices view, that detailed view that appears at the top of the screen, and I'm going to skinny it up so it takes up about half the screen. Let's do a little cleanup. Let's retitle this column Invoice Number, and let's make that as narrow as possible. Let's just call this Date. Skinny that up. Salesperson. And now that will give us room to see all of the content in this particular table. And I'm going to have to skinny this up a little bit, so I'll just call this Name, and we'll abbreviate those names so we just see that. And you know what? Let me show you an easier way to do it. Stretch it out so you can see everything, and skinny up those columns until you just have this one column left on the right, and then smush it back together like this. And we can abbreviate this last column Total, so everything fits. And there we go. I made that room so I could sneak the detail, the summary table, summary by customer, right up next to it. And now to make it look a little more attractive, I'm going to reselect the detail view, grab the bottom sizing block, and push it up so these views are both the same size. This creates lots of room at the bottom for the next view that I want to present. And that is going to be a graphic presentation of what we see here at the top of the screen, but in a slightly different format. Now remember I said at the beginning that we can have multiple views on the same screen form. And here we see exactly that. 2 views. However, both of these views are looking at the same table. They're both selecting the invoices table. Now, I have updated this database just a little bit to include a second table that summarizes our invoices. And I want to show you why I've done that. Do not follow along these next few steps. I'm going to grab a layout element and grab a charting element. Grab the sizing box so it takes up the entire space in the lower half of my screen. And I am going to select the invoices table. And sure enough, it is going to show me a graphic presentation. And to save space, I'm going to turn off the legend. Here is every invoice, every bar representing a single invoice, and these are the almost 400 invoices that appear or exist in the invoices table. It's a bar chart, it's a graphic presentation, but it's hardly useful. And here's the reason why. Charts are summary data. They are graphic presentations of summarized data. In Ninox, it is highly recommended that you don't attempt to draw a chart with extensive amounts of detail. And that's what we have here. The invoices table that we have been working with throughout this class is detailed information. One single invoice at a time, 390, almost 400 invoices for an entire year. To effectively draw the chart that we want, which is a bar chart showing invoices total sales by month, we first need to summarize those invoices by month, so we then can subsequently draw a picture of that summary data. It is never a good idea in Ninox to ask the chart to do both the summarization and the drawing or the graphic presentation. And the reason is we end up with something like this. This kind of content is better presented in detail in these record listings at the top of the screen. Let's get rid of this chart and let's take advantage of the new table that we set up. The table has already been built, but I do want to show you what it contains and how it was created. The table is called Invoices Summary. It contains one record, and that record has 12 fields, one field for each month of the year. The formula for each of these 12 fields is almost identical, and it looks like this. We establish a variable called I, and we select all the invoices where the month of the invoice date is equal to a number, and the numbers range from 1 to 12. In this case, for the formula that is the month of January, we are selecting an array of invoices, and the qualifications to be included in that array is that the month of the invoice date is month number 1. We are then establishing a second variable called X, and X is equal to the sum of the total invoice fields of all of the records in this array. And the reason we've done it this way is so I could demonstrate to you a very, very powerful feature of Ninox. And that is the ability to not only install or insert a single value into a single variable. Here we have selected an entire array of data, almost 30 individual invoice records. And that entire array is now stored in the single variable that is in this case called the variable I. We then can specify the name of a field and the mathematic or statistical manipulation that we want to apply to the contents of that field in the records within this array, and it will give us a numeric value. Here we see the formula for the month of January. The month of February, almost identical, except the qualification for inclusion in the array to be stored in the variable I is that it be month 2, the month of February. As you would expect, July is month 7, and December is month 12. So we have the summarized total of invoices, the monthly sales summarized by month here in this table called Invoices Summary. That was step one. Excuse me. To summarize the data. Step two is to draw the picture of the summarized data. We want that picture to appear on our dashboard. The way we include pictures or graphic presentations in dashboards is with an element, a view element called a chart. Not only are you able to have multiple views in a single screen form, as you see on the screen right now, but each of those views can point to a different table. Let's see this in action. I'm going to place this chart view, this graphic view, in the bottom half of the screen, and with the element selected, grab the sizing bar at the bottom and drag it down so it takes up the entire bottom half of the screen. Save the changes. Now, for those of you following along on your own computer, select or click on the Edit wrench or the Administrative Mode wrench for the chart element and type the formula, select, but this time it's the table Invoices Summary. This is the table we built, that one table with one record with 12 fields. One field for each of the 12 months of the year, and each field has a formula that requires Ninox to select the invoices out of the detail table for just each of those months and summarize or add up the total of all of the invoices for each month. We did the calculation, the summarization, in one step, in one table, and now we're going to draw the picture in another. Select Edit Columns and fill in all 12 fields. January, February, March, April, May, June, and so on until you have in order the 12 months of the calendar year with January coming first and December coming last. Click OK twice and there we have it. And to save space, I'm going to turn the legend off. Save changes, exit administrative mode, and now we can see all of our sales in three different ways, three different views of the same data. Invoice by invoice, summarized and counted by customer with the ability to drill down to see just the invoices of a specific customer by clicking on that customer's name. And don't forget, both of these views are controlled by the beginning and ending date parameters that we established in these two fields up top. And then finally below, a third view, but this view looking at a different table, a table that summarizes those invoices into monthly invoice totals or monthly sales totals and presents those totals as bars here in the view chart or the graphic view in the bottom of the screen. If we would prefer to see this as a line chart showing growth or decline of sales over time, that is as simple as selecting this chart view, going to chart type, and selecting line chart. And to make it nice, let's smooth out the lines. Click OK, save changes, and exit administrative mode. Now we have a really nice sales dashboard. We can control what we see by month, and in this case I'm going to restrict it just to the month of November. So we'll start with November 1 and end with November 30th, 2018. The top two tables or the top two views changed because we're using these parameters to control what is selected by using these variables to limit what is included in the selected array by virtue of the invoice date. This third view is not linked or tied or controlled by these date parameters. Therefore, no matter what we see up top, we still see the same view at the bottom, and that is total sales progressing month by month from the beginning of the year through to the end. We can turn detail on and off, or we can drill down just to see the detail we want on a customer by customer basis. And everything you see here on this customer sales dashboard was built using the select statement. One simple function, a number of different ways to apply it, with a number of different ways to enhance it. We can select records and present them in an array. We can select records and summarize them. Mathematically additive totals, a sum, averages, counts, mins, max, first and last. Lots of different ways to manipulate or transform the contents of a selected array into a piece of information. And then as we see here at the bottom of the screen, business intelligence. That concludes this class on using views and using those views and powering them with the select statement. I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I hope both of these classes, this one and the previous one, have given you a better understanding of how we can now use the data that we have spent so long capturing in our Ninox databases, how we can use that data and transform it into information, into business intelligence, into summarized information, and into graphic presentations. All of this done in the incredibly powerful system that is Ninox, and all of it accomplished with a single, simple command, the select command. That's it for now. Go practice what you've learned in this lesson and come back for our next training class when we will continue to explore the features and functions of the Ninox language and the Ninox database programming platform. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you in the next class. Bye-bye.